Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from the UCF College of Business, offering the new online space MBA. Designed for professionals in innovative and high-growth industries, beginning spring 2026, students gain advanced business skills through the lens of the space economy. Learn more at business.ucf.edu/space MBA.
Embracing infinite possibilities in Crime in Orbit, a look back at the books of 2025. You're listening to Are We There Yet?, the radio show exploring space exploration. Hi, I'm Brendan Byrne. This week we're looking back at some of the books and authors highlighted on this show. Veteran NASA astronaut Dr. Bernard Harris is trying to inspire others to reach for the stars in his book, Embracing Infinite Possibilities, Letting Go of Fear to Find Your Highest Potential. We'll speak with Harris about his book, inspiration, and his journey to space. Then, just like pirates roam the sea, the idea of pirates or criminals in space could be more of a reality than we think. Space Piracy, Preparing for a Criminal Crisis in Orbit, explores that as humans commercialize and potentially live in space. In the future, crime in orbit could be a real possibility. We'll speak with the book's authors, Hugh Taylor and Mark Feldman, about potential raiders in orbit. That's ahead on Are We There Yet? A former NASA astronaut, Dr. Bernard Harris, logged over 400 hours in orbit on 2 space flights, and he was the first African American to ever walk in space. After returning to Earth, Dr. Harris turned his passion for science and spaceflight into a passion for helping others. He's the author of the book Dreamwalker, A Journey of Achievement and Inspiration, and Embracing Infinite Possibilities, Letting Go of Fear to Find Your Highest Potential. He hopes to inspire others to be the best versions of themselves they can be. We first spoke with Dr. Harris in April about his career, his book, and his mission to help others. Here's part of that conversation now. Dr. Harris, welcome to Are We There Yet?
It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we talk about this new book, I want to chat with you about your experience as an astronaut. And from the astronauts that we've had on this show before, we hear of the overview effect, right? You get a renowned sense of place and purpose on our planet back home. How did the overview effect affect you?
This is the first time that I've heard it referred to as an overview, but I guess it really is. On my second mission, I got a chance to do a spacewalk. I donned this 350-pound spacesuit and walked outside, was out there for around 5 hours or so. But after we completed all of our activities, I got a chance to just take it all in. As you know, I think you've interviewed a number of us, that it really is a busy time on orbit, and we rarely get time where we can just sit back and take it all in. And so you can imagine me on the end of a robotic arm, looking back at my crew members in the spaceship below me, and then the Earth, and then behind that, the Milky Way galaxy. It does give you a different perspective, sort of a God's eye view, as we say a lot. It does change your perspective on things. And for me, coming from my background, it also said, how can I share this perspective with others around me? And so that's probably the creation, the origin, in part, of some of the activities that I do around, community, giving back, and leadership.
I want to talk about that spacewalk because one of the chapters in your book is called Overcoming Fear and Taking the Leap. And when I've heard of recounts of spacewalks, to me, it is absolutely terrifying. How are you? You're putting your safety and your life in the hands of the engineers who designed your spacesuit, of your colleagues that are controlling the arm that's taking you to where you need to go, and you're zooming in orbit with just this protective suit to protect you from the vacuum of space. It sounds absolutely terrifying. Tell me a bit about how you overcame that.
If I can, I'll make it even more terrifying.
Oh, wonderful.
So, imagine that, you're on orbit 250 nautical miles above the Earth, going around at 17,500 miles an hour, seeing a sunset or sunrise every 45 minutes, and you're just in microgravity. So you're just kind of floating there. I remember that first step was a doozy, because when we opened up the airlock door, it was pointed toward the Earth. So the first thing I had to overcome was this sense of falling. You ever remember walking up to a well? I grew up in the country, so we would go up to a well. I remember as a kid looking over the well, and, oh my God, it's deep. So that was the first sense. Yeah, and especially if you think about that, the airlock is about 3.5 to 4 feet in diameter. So it really is like a window to the world, but this world we're moving by fairly quickly. So I had to overcome that first fear. The second was once we got outside, there was this great sense of movement as we are moving across, just skirting across the atmosphere at 200 nautical miles. And there's this great sense of movement, and you couldn't stare at it too long because it would disorient you. Finally got what I call my space legs or arms in this case together, since we pull ourselves along using tethers. And I just focused on the activity, the satellite that we were about to handle, the activity that we had in preparation for building the International Space Station. And so it really is a good reference to, sometimes when we get into these situations and they are scary, they are fearful, but what's important is that we then, if we choose to, can just focus on the task at hand, whatever that task is that you have to do. And put aside that fear, because if you keep that fear in it and it gets internalized, then it prevents you from really doing what you need to do.
And reading about that spacewalk, it was your job to retrieve a satellite that was in orbit. You literally had to grab a spacecraft that was orbiting at this immense speed and this immense altitude that you've already described there. I mean, that has got to be an inspiration, right?
For sure. Let me correct something a little bit. We certainly have grabbed satellites before when we needed to, but normally what we do is we grab it with the robotic arm. Going back to that picture, we're all floating, you have to rendezvous with the satellite. Then you use the robotic arm to actually reach out and slowly, as you catch up to the satellite, grab it. And so it really is this big choreography of activities that need to be done in order for us to grab this satellite and put it back in. So we normally don't grab it by hand. So I just want to make sure that's...
But close enough. I'm going to say that's close enough. So you're grabbing satellites out of space. You've made these trips to orbit. You've done a spacewalk, which very few people have gone to space. Even fewer people have done spacewalks. And that experience and your goal to instill inspiration in people down here on Earth. Tell me, who is this book written for?
As I started writing it, it really started out as me saying, okay, there are some concepts here that I think people need to grasp in order to be successful, whatever they decide to do. And I always like to say that I'm not here to recruit you to be an astronaut. I'm here to recruit you to be the best person that you can be. In that, there are some tenets that I think are sort of consistent that people have to do in order to reach their full potential. In the book, I try to outline that in the different chapters. So some of the chapters are titled, understanding your place in the world and changing your perspective, about the environment that you're in, finding your calling. So these are just examples. And then raising your expectations, because some of us have low expectations of what we can do in life. And so I talk about all of those different things. So it can attract to different audiences depending on where you are and who you are. So if you were to pin me down, it would be probably young adults, high school students, college students specifically, those people who are looking to literally reach their highest potential. Because I firmly believe that we are all born for a reason. We have certain tasks and things that we ought to do while we're here on this earth.
You're listening to Are We There Yet?, the radio show exploring space exploration from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. We are revisiting a conversation with author and veteran NASA astronaut Dr. Bernard Harris about his book, Embracing Infinite Possibilities, Letting Go of Fear to Find Your Highest Potential. You alluded to this in your answer about the overview effect. I want to ask you about religion and faith. You mentioned it in the book. What role did it play in your time as an astronaut?
In those moments in which there may be opportunities where fear will raise its ugly head are the times in which I needed to rely on faith. I'll give you an example. I came in the astronaut class of 1990. When I came in, we go through a year or two of basic training, and another 2 to 3 years of specific mission training. And I was pretty lucky. I was probably the first in my class to be selected for a mission. So this was 3 months after we had completed our astronaut candidate training. And then we were supposed to fly 8 months from the day in which I was asked to serve on this flight. 2 years later, we actually flew. And it was through many different stops and goes, meaning that we get assigned to a date that we're going to lift off, and then something happens. We had some fuel leaks and whole space shuttle fleet. And then there were issues around some engines, and there were different issues. And finally, we think that we're going into space, get in the vehicle, we get down to the countdown and main engines of the space shuttle light, and then a second and a half into that, we get master's alarms, and then the engines cut off. And talking about disappointed. At that point, you begin to doubt, is this really going to happen? And I remember, once we got safely out of the vehicle and getting home and picking up the Bible, because I had been a believer for a long time, and picking up a passage that I talk about in the book that gave me solace. It talked about carrying me from the ends of the world and still holding me safely in God's arms. And that was just so comforting to me, enough to get me through the month of standing down until we got in the vehicle a month later and successfully launched in space. And now I got a chance because of, I think, in part, my faith, and of course, the training and all that sort of thing, but my faith primarily that allowed me to see the earth as I believe that God sees the earth.
What a poignant and relevant passage as a traveler in those sorts. That's very powerful. Thanks for sharing that. If you look at your bio, it's pretty incredible. Multiple degrees in science, medicine, business, spacewalker, 2-time shuttle astronaut. But from what I've read about you, some of the most important work you do is with the Harris Foundation. Can you chat with me a bit about what that foundation does and how does that tie into kind of the message of your book?
We founded the foundation in 1998, but we've been doing the work probably starting 5 years before that. As an astronaut, as you can imagine, because of our experience, we get a chance to be asked at many different communities around the nation to come and talk to young folks, whether they're in secondary education or in college level. And I realized as I was going across the country that there were issues in our education system. There were gaps, maybe said differently, in our education system that need to be filled. And sometimes, and that's not always. And so I don't want to, I'm making this generality, but just to make the point that I saw that there was a need for people outside of the educational system that have experience outside the educational system, and people who had experiences that were different, like growing up in a modest community or growing up in a minority community or in the inner city or in the rural area, that needed to bring that perspective to students. And then secondarily, realizing that the world in which the students are going into were driven by education. So if you go to our website, theharrisinstitute.org, what you'll find is that our focus is on STEM education and STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, with the A added for STEAM. And the focus is about preparing young people for the future, for the now, where technology drives everything that we do, and targeting all folks, but with a specific focus on socially and economically disadvantaged communities. So that's the focus. And then lastly, that we focus in 3 areas that are critical to success, both individually and from a community standpoint, and that's through education, health, and wealth. So those are kind of the focuses.
Dr. Bernard Harris is a veteran NASA astronaut. His book is Embracing Infinite Possibilities. Dr. Harris, thanks for joining us.
Been a pleasure.
Still to come, could crime in space be a real thing?
In the near term, it could be things like hijacking of satellites or theft of space equipment, ransoming space equipment or space cargoes.
Space piracy, could it be more reality than fiction? That's ahead on Are We There Yet?
Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from Daytona Beach International Airport, offering new nonstop service to New York City and Boston, Massachusetts, beginning December 4th. Daytona Beach International Airport features convenient access to the terminal, easy and close parking, and more. Details at flydab.com.
You're listening to Are We There Yet? From Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. One mission set to launch in 2026 will save an observatory before it comes crashing back to Earth. The Swift Observatory launched to study gamma ray bursts, but it's at risk of deorbiting. We'll talk about the mission and the efforts to save it. That's next week on Are We There Yet? But for now, we're talking about potential crime in space. In science fiction movies and shows like Star Wars and Star Trek, one popular theme is the idea that criminals roam the galaxy. While those characters aren't real, could criminals prowl through our solar system one day? In the book Space Piracy, Preparing for a Criminal Crisis in Orbit, that possibility is explored, along with a look at the current laws that are in place to monitor crime off our planet. Here to talk about the book and what crime pirates may carry out in space are authors Hugh Taylor and Mark Feldman. Mark Feldman is the executive director, and Hugh Taylor is the director of the Center of Space Crime, Piracy, and Governance. We spoke with them back in April. Here's part of that conversation now. Hugh, Mark, welcome to Are We There Yet?
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, so the book opens comparing Star Wars to our space world now. I am a huge Star Wars fan, so I appreciate that. But Mark, I'm going to start with you. Why did you choose that scene to set the stage for the thesis of this book?
Well, it did have, if you remember that, with nefarious characters in the movie. And while it may have been exaggerated, it is our take on the thesis of the book that there will be some extraordinarily nefarious, nasty, and rather evil characters that will be inhabiting space, if not now, in the not too distant future, as pirates and as criminals become aware of the potential of profits and plunder in space. And we thought that that was a good scene to open up that book, get the readers involved in our thesis, which is quite simply that non-state actors, criminals, cartels, pirates, will be deeply involved in inhabiting space, not just sovereign nations.
Hugh, what is the argument that we shouldn't be thinking of this as science fiction at this point and be thinking of it as a very short-term science fact?
It's been a little bit challenging because this is a problem that doesn't really exist yet, although you could argue that we're in the very early stages of it. The science fiction is seductive because it's like, okay, it's fantastic, it's amazing, it's who knows, it'll never happen, it could be 1,000 years from now. But the reality is this problem is creeping up on us, and our basic premise is that now is the time to be thinking about it. My point in the book is that we now spend $250 billion a year fighting, cyber threats because of bad decisions in engineering that were made 60 years ago around computer architecture. And if we want to avoid that kind of situation in space, this is the time to be thinking about it and treat this, as you said, as a fact or a soon-to-be fact.
We call it speculative nonfiction.
Ooh, I like that.
It's sort of a touching point to science fiction. Science fiction has a very weird history, and we mention it in the book of a movie that was actually quite popular in Germany, a silent movie called Women on the Moon. That's the English translation of the German. And the story, essentially, it's a bit of a romp of a bunch of characters looking for treasure on the moon. Sounds sort of like plunder in space and the commercialization of it. But what was fascinating is that movie, which was, again, a phenomenon quite popular in Germany, had a couple of very interesting people that watched it. The first and most notable one was Werner von Braun, and the second one was a gentleman by the name Hans Oberith, and the two of them together were responsible for really space and V2s and all the way into our space program in the United States when we brought them from Germany after the war. What was predictive about it is that when von Braun got his seed money from the German military in the mid-30s, it didn't take long for the military to censor the movie, not because they had a problem with ideological component of the movie, but because designs and the rocketry and everything about what they were doing in the development of German rocketry had a very eerie connection and similarities based on the art direction of the movie. And that was actually, it was stunning if you look at early pictures of from the film and what they were doing at that time. It was breathtakingly almost identical.
I'm thinking to agreements that are already in place that one would think would help prepare for this. new world. I'm thinking of the Outer Space Treaty and other things. Are there foundational laws or documents or treaties in place today that can help prevent this, or do we really need to rethink pretty much all of our space diplomacy efforts at this point?
The treaties are a good foundation and they are applicable, but there's a lot of white space that needs to be filled in and a lot of ambiguity around how laws might be enforced. Keep in mind that when we talk about space piracy, we're contemplating activities, a lot of which could be happening on the ground, like hijacking of space equipment. And you immediately run into some of the deficiencies of international law, which have come up, fighting piracy at sea. And so in space, it's even more complicated. And the treaties are helpful and not helpful in the sense that you can't really establish international sovereignty in space. So there's a lot of ambiguity about which laws would apply and who would enforce them if they could be enforced. I mean, we're in an environment in space where if you have a commercial venture in space and somebody, steals from you, even if it's against the law, who's going to stop them? That's a real problem in practical terms.
You're listening to Are We There Yet? The radio show exploring space exploration from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. We're revisiting a conversation with authors Hugh Taylor and Mark Feldman about their book, Space Piracy, Preparing for a Criminal Crisis in Orbit. Mark Feldman is the executive director and Hugh Taylor is the director of the Center of Space, Crime, Piracy, and Governance. You mean to tell me criminals don't care about the 1967 Outer Space Treaty and will follow it? Hugh, you kind of alluded to this, but some of the issues, you can compare this to, issues in governing international waters. It seems to be the issue is there are no boundaries in space, and there will not be, right?
Well, it's unclear. My understanding of space law, which is very complicated, and we're not lawyers, is that it's illegal, according to the treaty, for the United States or Russia to say that a piece of the moon, for example, is their territory. If the United States builds a lunar outpost, that outpost is considered part of the United States according to the law. So somebody commits a crime in that place, they're subject to American law, at least in theory. So it gets a little complicated, but this is a case where the practicalities of law enforcement are very significant. As Mark just mentioned, like, for example, you go back to the Caribbean in the 1700s, that was about as remote as space is now. So people could do more or less whatever they wanted. It took months for anybody to catch up with them if they ever did. And space may present a similar type of venue. And on Earth, like this is something that the book really revealed, is that the way the world really works versus the way people think it works is often quite different. Especially a lot of space operations are conducted in equatorial countries that may not have the same levels of government infrastructure and law enforcement and laws that you have like in the EU or United States. And so you might have, for example, local criminal groups that are really running the thing where you're launching your rockets and where your ground stations are, and you're going to have to deal with them. It's not the official government of that country may not be that helpful to you.
It would be analogous, if I can say that, for instance, if let's say take Guinea-Bissau, Mexican cartel Sinaloa runs the oil business there. It first started off as they were using Guinea-Bissau in Africa as a transport between Latin America, Africa, and Europe. But because the Sinaloa cartel had experience in working with Pemex and extorting from it, they saw easy pickings. So back to Mexico, the cartels have a great deal of control over the airport operations. It's not out of the realm of possibilities that with spaceports in countries outside the United States, cartels will basically have control of the access to the spaceports, what's in the spaceports, and develop spaceports on their own.
With the caveat that I know that this is speculative, what other types of crime are we looking at? Like when we talk about space hacking or space hijacking, is it these bad faith actors taking control of a satellite and doing nefarious things, or taking control of a satellite and holding it at ransom, much like folks do down here for ransomware attacks? What does the future of space crime look like?
So I think in the near term, it could be things like hijacking of satellites or theft of space equipment, ransoming space equipment or space cargoes. I think as you get further out in the future, you could be looking at more, disruption or hijacking of space products and space industry. which is something that doesn't really exist yet. But people are, for example, if they're mining on the moon or mining on an asteroid, the transport of those materials could be hijacked by pirates. There's also potential for financial crime in space, like money laundering and fraud, as well as smuggling, which is something we talk about in the book, which isn't really piracy per se, but it's kind of adjacent. The other thing which we wanted to emphasize is the use of piracy for geopolitical reasons. This is something that happened in the old days, and it's happening now in cyber world, where a country will encourage a local cyber gang to disrupt the operations of its adversary, but say, hey, it wasn't us. We didn't do anything. It's these criminals, wink, wink. And this is what happened, between England and Spain in the 1700s. It could happen now where a criminal gang operating on behalf of China could, blow up an American satellite, and the Chinese government could say, well, don't look at us. Wasn't us, deniability.
Our assumption that criminals will have the technological means, even possibly even more advanced, because historically, criminals tend to be extremely innovative. They have the financial means to do so. So historical example, although it is a bit of an analogy, is during the colonial times in the United States, pirates and privateers were the impetus of advancing shipbuilding technology and design all the way from colonial shipbuilding centers from Massachusetts all the way down to the Carolinas, because their needs, the shipbuilders were building merchant ships, but the needs of privateers and pirates were basically fast, lethal, slim, get the plunder, get a couple of people to ransom and move on. We see the same thing happening on a more sophisticated level in technological development of creating rockets that are very fast, unlike the lumbering ones. We see the technological developments in the utilization of AI materials, because they will involve themselves in the investments in venture capital companies or create their own to develop these things clandestinely. And then nobody will know about it until they are revealed in criminal activities.
Finally, Hugh and Mark, what are you hoping nations will take away from this, as you call it, speculative nonfiction, as to what could be happening in the very near future when it comes to space crime? What action do you want to happen now?
We think that at least two things should happen. One is some sort of dialogue between a lot of diverse stakeholders to talk about addressing this problem through secure design principles. And then also, trying to set some standards for security and criminal mitigation in space. And the model would be aviation, where currently, for example, you can't put a plane in the air without certain certifications of the equipment, the avionics and stuff, that the same should hold for space as well to fight crime.
It's also, I would like to say, they need to understand that there are and will be non-state actors as deeply involved in space on all levels. Ground, in space, they will have the intelligence, they will have the finance, they will have the technological abilities, they will be lethal, they will forge alliances clandestinely with no doubt clandestine intelligence agencies, as you alluded to, as plausible deniabilities in sort of right threshold, but not exactly warfare.
A terrifying future. Thanks for laying it out. We've been speaking with Mark Feldman and Hugh Taylor. They are the authors of Space Piracy, Preparing for a Criminal Crisis in Orbit. Mark, Hugh, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having us.
That's going to do it for this week's show. If you're not already, be sure to subscribe to the show's podcast feed so you never miss an episode. Do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected with this show. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at AWTYSpace. If you got an idea for a future episode of this show, or you want to join us as a guest, reach out. Our email is arewethereyet@cfpublic.org. Are We There Yet is a production of Central Florida Public Media. Our intern is Orion Boone. Our producer is Marian Summerall. Editorial guidance from LaToya Dennis. Support for Are We There Yet comes from our listeners. Until next week, I'm Brendan Byrne. Thanks for listening.